This is the show that helps you know what to quit, what to keep, and what to question. Welcome to the QuitCast. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the deliberative episode of the QuitCast. We are slowly winding down into doing the very last of these strengths-based QuitCast episodes, our Strengths for Writers series. And who would have thought when we started this way back in 2018 or 2019 that we would not be finished by the time we hit 2021. I certainly did not think that, but we are almost there. We only have a few left. Deliberative is one of our final strengths that we are covering. So today we're going to have Terry and Becca talk a little bit about what deliberative looks like as a strength. And then we will head into our Strengths for Writers talk show, where we have three amazing authors who are going to help us figure out what deliberative looks like as a writer, and then circle back with me at the very end and we'll see what we see. So deliberative, it's okay. So we're always super clear up front about the fact that we don't always have every strength, right? When we talk about them as coaches, because it does make a difference when you don't have a particular strength, how much harder it is to understand it. But I also feel like, especially in the BFA, I don't know if every strengths coach is like this, but especially in the BFA, with all of us with high individualization, we work really hard to try to understand from the inside out what it feels like to have a particular strength. So both Terry and I are low in deliberative. And when
I love deliberative.
We love it.
And you're right. And you're so right about that. And yeah, absolutely.
So we've had to work what I would consider to be pretty hard to find people and talk to them and understand and hear what it sounds like to have deliberative from the inside out. And of course, in the author talk show, you're going to hear from three very high deliberative authors, which will be great. But from a coaching perspective, as we parse apart, what does it look like to have deliberative? Then how would you describe deliberative as a strength to like a new client?
Yeah, I say deliberative takes serious care and time in making decisions and choices. Like they're excellent at anticipating obstacles and knowing and like seeing the challenges that are coming. But there's a deliberativeness about it, right? It's right in that word. And deliberative gets a bad rap sometimes, right? Because when we see people come to us with it, it's holding them up. It's stopping them from making decisions. But the truth is, when it's working well, deliberative helps people make those decisions, and that their hesitation is coming from a lack of certainty in certain areas. Yeah, but that's how I describe it, that it takes serious care in making decisions and choices.
Right. And the serious care part, I think, is where people who have deliberative and people who don't have deliberative have a different estimation of what serious care looks like.
Yes,
because if you talk to a high activator, low deliberative like Terry, and what they mean when they say serious care making decisions, because very few people think that they make bad decisions, right? Like very few people would say, if you were to ask them the question, do you take care making the decisions that you make? Almost everyone would say, of course I do. Like I take care. But there is a difference between what serious care looks like and doesn't when you have deliberative, because the deliberative process can be very fast. For instance, when they have all the information, when the either or decision is very easy, when there are a limited number of variables, like there are a lot of reasons that deliberative could make a very quick decision. But the serious care is, I don't make decisions without thinking about them on some level. And then when I make the decision, I want to make it and take action on it. And that's why, again, like we talk about this a little bit with the authors, deliberative is an execution strength and not a thinking strength, specifically because there is an action point after the decision has been made.
Absolutely. I always think of when I was in sales, one of my first bosses, Steve, I learned the difference between right away. And something happened where, and I think this is a good example for what does serious care mean to each person depends on their strengths that they have. Because I had a customer who needed something right away, and I hung up the phone and he said, "What does that mean?" And I looked at him like, "It means they need it tomorrow." And he said, Why don't you ask them for me? And so I got on the phone and I apologized. I'm like, I'm really sorry. My boss is making me ask you what right away means. I mean, when we all know what that obviously is, but what is right away to you? And the customer says, well, I'm way up north here. I'm not going to get to this for 2 weeks. Usually people don't get me stuff until 3 or 4 weeks. So yeah, if I could get it in 2 weeks, I'd be happy. That's right away for me. And my jaw dropped. I was like, wow, right away doesn't mean to them what it meant. And I think that's a great example for the same thing. You're right. My activator, right away to my activator, we're done. We've already made 3 decisions, but right away for deliberative or serious care for deliberative means something very different. And that's a key thing, because we've had deliberatives do that. Remember, every once in a while they will say, especially with strategic, we'll explain how strategic works and how they work similar ways, but different a little bit. And to a deliberative, they don't really understand the difference of what we're talking about. When we say strategic goes fast, the deliberative will say, so do I. Like I go fast as well.
Well, and so the difference, this was really fascinating. One of the writers in the talk show points this out. So we'll hear it in a little bit, but I wanted to parse through this just a little bit. He said, the process leading up to making the decision may or may not be short, but the decision itself is always very fast. And I was like, oh, that's really different. Tell me about that. Because of course, to me with low deliberative, I would actually say my decision-making process includes all of the researching, all of the etc. But for an executing strength, right? It's like, no, the actual decision is pushing the equal sign on the calculator. And now we've inputted all the data and now we're going to make the decision. Whereas like for me with intellection, I think I can go back and forth between variables often and not be able to make decisions because I don't have that capacity to weigh the way that deliberatives do, because they very much assess what the risk is and they weigh that risk against the non-risk, right? So when you talk to Crystal, for instance, our Crystal Shannon, who's our Patreon manager, her ability to make a decision quickly is because it's very easy for her to assess whether the risk is worth taking or not for her. So she's constantly vigilant about potential risk. And then when she sees it, it's like, yep, I'm not willing to do that. And then it's just immediate equal sign pushing on the calculator.
It's interesting too, from the process that you were just describing, deliberative person may include the research and looking into things as part of their deliberativeness, whereas someone with high input would say, no, that's my input does that and my strategic does that. And that's pretty interesting too, to see how they were
right. And it's all about where does that come from. And I think this is a good, as we start to coach strengths, more and more and more years, like we have coaches who are getting into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of authors, in addition to, like, it used to be that I was the only one who had that kind of experience. And now we have multiple coaches who are getting to that place. And as we talk about those strengths, we get more and more fine-tuned in our capacity to look at where is this coming from and why does that matter? So for instance, a high deliberative who still is not able to push the equal sign has not completely finished assessing all of the risk, the potential risk yet. A high input who is not pushing that equal sign might be overloaded by information rather than not have enough information, right? So it's all about figuring out where that behavior is coming from and like looking for us again as coaches, the action point or the development point in how do we get that to a better, faster place. Hello and welcome everyone to the Deliberative Strengths for Writers talk show, which is what we call it. And I want to welcome our three amazing writers today to talk about their deliberative, which is one of our final strengths that we're doing in this series. So I'm going to start off by having them each introduce themselves and what they write and where their deliberative is. And let's start off with Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy Claflin, and I'm primarily a thriller author, although I have dabbled in other genres. And deliberative is number 4 on my top strengths.
Thank you. And Kris?
So I'm Kris Jayne, and I write steamy contemporary romance. And I have, of course, lots of plans for things like cozy mysteries and all that, but I currently write romance. And my deliberative is number 3.
And Sean?
I'm Sean Mitchell. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm also a writer. So I'm working on my first novel, and it's in the historic fiction genre. Deliberative is my number 1.
Number one, deliberative. I was so excited. We have so few. We have very few.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting. And, but all of us are top 5. Well, not me. I'm a bottom 5 deliberative, just to be like full disclosure. I do not have this strength at all, but thankfully the 3 of you do. And we are going to find out a little bit more about your deliberative. So the first thing, and I'm going to start off with Sean, since you're number 1, when you describe deliberative to other writers or to other people, how do you describe it?
I use the word deliberate because the whole jury analogy, I think, clicks with people and they understand it then. But I would like to say that I think that there's a negative connotation that goes with deliberative. And I don't know if the other guests have experienced this, but when I started talking about strengths with people about a year ago, the different ones would come up: intellection and maximizer and these different things. And deliberative came up as being in my top 5. And several of my friends went, ooh, that's not good. Right. And so there's a sense that we can't make a decision, right? There's a sense that a deliberative person, just based on what they think of the word, you're somebody who can't make a decision. It takes forever for you to make a decision. But I don't find that at all to be the case with me anyway. But there's a process for me before I can get to that decision. And that process can take an hour or it can take a week, but there's going to be a process there that has to happen before, I can reach a decision.
Yeah, Kris, we've had a very similar conversation. I see you nodding your head, just about like feeling like deliberative is not slow at making decisions, right?
Right.
Totally. When I first got my top 10, I understood everything else. And I was like, I don't know about that number 3 deliberative, because I'm not a slow decision maker. In fact, sometimes I feel like I make rash decisions, or what seems to other people as being very quick, rash decisions. Like I quit my corporate job and it's just like, well, I'm just not going to do that anymore. And I had a plan for how over the next year, I'm going to plan my exit. And then kind of in the course of about a week after returning from a vacation, I was like, no, I'm going to quit at the end of October. This was like 5 years ago. And I just, and I think what I've come to realize is that some decisions are slow, but some are really fast. And it's because I'm constantly assessing and processing. The decision didn't actually come out of nowhere, even though it seemed like that to other people. It actually had been churning there's a lot of dissatisfaction churning for a long time, a lot of other things I wanted to do that were churning for a long time. And so then when the inflection point hit, I was actually ready with the information to instantly kind of make this decision that seemed very sudden to other people. On the other hand, I've had the same 3 paint colors swatched on my bathroom wall for like 7 years. So, but it's because there's no real inflection point or anything that's like forcing me to make that choice.
Yeah. There's no catalyst, right? And when there is a catalyst, deliberative can make a fairly quick decision. Or the other option is, and I think Stacy will say this probably as well, it's when the decision, like when you've made something similar before. So there are some decisions in your books even that will go really quickly, because like I've made this decision 1,000 times before, but then there are decisions that are riskier or that you don't have as much information about, right? So Stacy, how do you describe deliberative to other people?
I kind of think of it as almost a cross between a thinking strength and an acting strength, because I put a lot of thought into the things that I'm going to do. And then once I've thought it all out, then I have a strong decision. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I'm ready to take quick action.
So the active point I think of as the hitting the equals on the calculator. Like when I'm ready to make the decision, the actual decision. And I think the way Sean described it also was like, there might be a process for like gathering information or weighing information, or like what Christina was saying about assessing everything all the time. That's something we hear a lot of deliberatives talk about. Like, oh, I don't feel like a slow decision maker, but I'm always aware of everything that's going on around me, right? Yeah, Sean.
So yeah, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but for me, and I thought that everybody was kind of like this, but I'm not sure that that's the case. But when I like the term that you use, Beck, about reaching certainty, that when you reach certainty, or when I reach certainty, I feel like a click in my head, right? Like, that's it. That's the right decision. With Kris, when she was talking about leaving her job, I think that made sense to me, right? Because she took a pause and then realized, oh, I can quit. I think she said October. I can quit in October, and that's what I'm going to do. Because she reached that point of certainty. I think there was a kind of click where she knew that that was the right thing, and then you don't need to look back, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to think about it anymore, or ruminate over it anymore. It's done.
That's why it's an executing strength, which is the big thing that we had this conversation with Becca 1,000 times, right? Where it's like, it's not a thinking strength, it's an executing strength. Yep. And the reason why it is because once I had that certainty, there was like nothing that was going to keep me in that job. I'm like, why am I going to hang around for a year when I already know I want to get the hell out of here? Yeah. It becomes intolerable to me to stay here because I already know I'm gone.
Well, and the easiest place, and this is why I love that you put it in terms of like, why would I stay here? Because the option is stay or go. Like, that's a really easy place for deliberative to be, where there's two variables, where it's like, this is intolerable and this is not intolerable. And so that's an easy decision. What tends to happen that makes it more difficult is when it gets more complex. So like 20 different options is much harder to weigh the differences between those, which is why the deliberate word in deliberative that's where deliberative is the easiest. It's assess risk, look at what the two options are and weigh between those. We talk about the guilty or innocent, right? Like the guilty weight and the scales of justice kind of a thing. It's like, well, where is all the weight located? Well, once we know for sure you're not coming back from this, then the decision is made, right? Where do you tend to see this? And let's start with Stacy. Where do you tend to see this in your writing life the most?
For me, I see it when I'm planning, like in the planning stages. I semi-recently went over to domestic thrillers from psychological. And so I remember spending hours going through the top 100 list over at Amazon, looking at the covers, looking at the blurbs, reading some of the top books, and I wanted to be certain I knew what the genre was before I started to write in it and market in it. And I needed to have that certainty.
Kris, what about you?
So I used to say, and like this is very recent, where I've switched from saying I'm a slow writer. I'm actually not a slow writer. I'm a very fast writer. I'm a slow thinker and plotter and whatever. Once I kind of things click into place, the book comes actually really, really fast. But it's just, the thinking part could take me a couple of months, or it could, like my current work in progress, it's taken me 5 years, right? This is a book I started 5 years ago and then couldn't get it. And so moved on to other things. And now that I'm revisiting it and it's like clicking along. So I think it comes in there. It's the thinking and the plotting and kind of, even though I'm not an outliner, but I'm a thinker, and then I write it kind of without too much detailed outlining. And then I was thinking my editing process is also really fast because the decisions are already made before I even started the writing. So I'll tweak some things, but I'm not going to change a lot in editing because it's like, look, that's a done deal. And I already know how, and I've already also kind of anchored in, like, especially my current project is the first book in a new series. So it's like, I've already anchored in a lot of things that are going to like play out. And so I'll be loath to change a lot of stuff in editing.
Well, and I love too that you said, I've been thinking about this for 5 years, but I went and did other things. Cause I do think that that deliberative execution desire is pretty hardcore. Like I want to be making forward progress. We talk about it as like one step at a time down the road, but I don't ever not want to be stepping. So whenever I feel like I'm not making progress as a deliberative, it can be a really good foil for intellection, where intellection tends to like that process of thinking. And so the deliberative can kind of like catalyze that intellection a little bit.
Right.
Sean, what about
Yeah.
you? Where do you see deliberative in your writing?
Well, I just wanted to mention before I answer that, the
Yeah.
something that James Cameron does, the writer director James Cameron. He apparently does this thing where he'll have several projects going at once, which a lot of filmmakers do. One of the things that he'll do is he'll get to a certain point on a project and then think like, I don't know how to go forward with this, right? I'm stuck. And what he'll do is he'll just move to his next project. And he has a separate desktop on his computer even set up for each project, right? So he can just flip to a different desktop and have everything populated with that other project, and he can just keep going with that. So it seems like that would be a handy thing for a deliberative, maybe to have.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah,
I'm just writing that down. That's totally...
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw Christina taking notes, because what's so funny too is this is part of why we have all the deliberative writers together, right? Is because some of the ways that like Kris or Sean or Stacy will have found to handle their deliberative and their other strengths as well, it will like spur us on to be like, oh, right, this has always worked for me in other ways. So I think this is why having super like-minded people to talk to is really important. So one of the things that Sean does, before I have him answer this question, that's been really cool to see with the deliberative is the translation from film writing, like script writing and directing notes and stuff like that, production to novel, has meant that as he's learning the process of writing a narrative instead of writing a screenplay, the deliberative has been very intentional about like, I need to stop and go learn this thing. And I need to stop and, think about this. And I don't know this part of the book yet. Right. So it feels like that deliberative is always constantly trying to press forward and make more progress. But it's like the deliberative, I think, instinctively understands not every single piece of the book writing process is putting words on the page. Like some of it is learning, some of it's thinking, right? Sean, have you found that to be true?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and the sort of breakdown that I did of The Shining was a really perfect example of that, right?
Yep.
And understanding, not only first person, third person, but free and direct style and how much I wanted to incorporate of that. And something like free and direct style is a good example of something that just doesn't exist in screenwriting, right? It's not a thing. So you don't even have to think about something like that. Which third person voice are you in? Those kinds of questions don't come up because you're always in third person dramatic. So that's a really good example of like, wait a second, I can't continue writing a novel if I don't understand something so basic about novel writing, right? And when I've read novels over the years, it's just not something I consciously thought about, right? It's all hitting me unconsciously. So I had to make that a conscious thing. So that's been part of my process, right?
Yeah.
If we want to talk about deliberative, but some of the things that Kris and Stacy had said, like, for me though, I see it showing up not only there, which is during the process, but in the planning stage. And I guess unlike Kris, I also see it in the editing stage. Where I can explore different things, because I always feel like a story is kind of like a car, like you're building a car, and eventually, at first it's just a bunch of parts and it doesn't look like anything, and you start putting it together and at first, and then next it looks kind of like a jalopy, but eventually you get to that point where it might not have doors on it, it might not be painted, but you decide to like turn over the ignition and it starts. Right. And you have a running car and it doesn't run very well, and it doesn't look very pretty, but it runs and it's running. And then from there, I can get it where I want it to be. And so for me, part of that is going to happen in editing because of that.
It's so funny to, like, I just have to point out the screenwriter difference, right? Like, the learning how to write as a script writer versus learning how to write as a novelist is very different. And so it also brings up this point of, like, this is also why we wanted to have people like Sean on the Quickcast, to see that there are more ways of expressing the strengths than just in novel form, because it exists in every part of every creative process. So the deliberative process of filmmaking, producing, I mean, literally, like, costuming, every piece of a process that a deliberative could have, you would see their deliberative in that excellence that they show. And so it's really important to be able to illustrate that as well.
You know, on that note, Becca, another good example is that I can tell you from the filmmaking world is actually specifically in visual effects. Because and here's an example. Let's say somebody, you know, a director comes to a visual effects company and says something like, I want to do this visual effects shot where a guy jumps off the Golden Gate Bridge and then he lands in a boat and sort of like and survives, right? And so the first thing that you do at a visual effects company like that is you go through and you poll everybody and say, where have you seen a shot like that in a film? And then we're going to get as many shots like that, anything similar to that as we possibly can, and we're going to assemble them on a reel, on one clip, back to back to back to back to back. And we're going to look at every single one of those shots. We want to know what's been done before. We want to know what's worked, what doesn't work. We don't want to copy anybody or repeat anything, et cetera, right?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Very deliberative.
That's super fascinating. Yeah, Kris, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think another difference when you talk about, you know, using deliberative in editing, part of it is a deliberate choice to cut things off because of, you know, I am a slower, you know, thinker, plotter, producer. I'm a slower producer of books. And Becca, you know this, I'm in a genre, I'm slow enough putting the books out in an environment in Steamy Contemporary where, I mean, some people are putting out 6 books, 12 books a year. And I'm like, I got my one done or more. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I got my one done. So I part of it is a conscious choice to, like, okay, I've put in all this. At some point I need to cut and move. So part of it, like, I think, is a market reality. Executing. Right. Because otherwise, you know, it's my achiever and other things are like, gotta get that book out. Competition. Are you getting the book out? Other people have like 9 books out. So I think part of it is that, you know, otherwise I might take much longer.
Well, and this is part of why it's so great for people to hear all different types of deliberative as well, because even just having the conversation about, like, I'm not a slow decision maker, you'll run into deliberatives who definitely consider themselves to be slow decision makers. And they'll almost talk about it like, I take a lot of care, and they prefer slow decision making processes. And so just knowing, like, there can even be a gamut from a deliberative activator all the way to, like, deliberative intellection context, you know, who's just like no executing strengths in sight and definitely needs to take that absolute care. So it's so great to see the diversity there. Do you feel a difference in how fast or slow you make decisions in writing versus marketing? Like, how do you see your deliberative working in your marketing as an author?
What I tend to do is I'll test things out, or, well, first I'll research things and look into it, see how things are working with other people before I jump in and try something myself. But once I find something that does work, I tend to just stick with it. Like with Facebook ads, I've been doing those for years, and when I find something that works, I just go with it. Like, I've had ads that I've left running for over a year because they just keep working. And I mean, I keep up on them, but I look for what works. And when something stops working, like newsletter swaps, haven't really been doing it lately. So I've kind of been backing off on those, doing just a few to get more mileage from them. But
Do you find yourself making really intentional decisions about your marketing budget, or does it feel like those are more intuitive? Like, do you have benchmarks and
it's a little bit of both. I mean, for
Mhm,
me, I'm not a spreadsheet person, at least not naturally. And so a lot of it is intuitive. I look at overall numbers,
mhm.
which can be good and bad. Like I didn't realize at one point that my thrillers were making so much money and that my other genres were pulling me down. But once I did, I said, okay, I'm writing thrillers. I finished up my other stuff and I've been writing thrillers for at least a straight year.
Nice. I'm always fascinated by, like, do you see yourself doing that deliberative weighing, or do you feel like you know at this point the metrics well enough to just make those quick decisions?
For the most part, I feel like it's just natural. I've done a lot of this long enough. I've been full-time since 2015 and I've been doing a lot of the basic ad type stuff for much of that time. And so it's just kind of second nature at this
Mhm.
point. But at the beginning, there's a lot of thinking and weighing and pulling in different information, sorting it, sifting through it before I come up with what I know the answer is. And like Kris was saying, I feel like once I'm ready, it's like this decision. Okay, I'm going this way, and that's where we're going.
Yeah. One of the things that is the most helpful about these quick cast episodes, what we used to call our keep casts, right? When we say what to keep, what to quit, and what to question, the strengths are the things we want to keep. And also, there are parts of our strengths that we may like more and may like less, right? So every once in a while, we run into this about a strength where we're getting a lot of questions about something. Deliberative is definitely one where we have had some questions about the basements of that strength. So if you have not yet checked out our balconies and basements episodes, we have two of them currently. I highly recommend doing that. It's so great with authors to be able to see several examples of really high functioning deliberative. And I was so happy that we got to do that today on the Quick Cast. And I also know that both with deliberative and other strength, with every strength, all 34, there are going to be parts of those strengths that are harder for us to work with and or that slow us down when we want to be faster and or things that are too fast and or whatever it is, right? Like there are always places that we want to improve. So if you haven't taken a look yet at those, please do click on the balconies and basements episodes that are going to show up here on your screen shortly. And please go check out that information. Additionally, we always like to push you towards our Patreon, where we do an awful lot of community work there. It's where our micro coaching is housed. If you have ever wanted to do some coaching just quickly with your strengths and hear 10 minutes worth, if you have a question, if you've been working with your strengths for a while and you just want to talk to a coach for a few minutes, please do head over to our Patreon. We do have on our addicts level, we have our micro coaching, which is our opportunity to talk live with the coach for about 10 minutes about your strengths and or anything about publishing that you might have questions about. So please go to patreon.com/BeccaSime and check that out today. And we hope that you'll enjoy all of the things we do over there. We talk about all aspects of publishing, about what to quit, what to keep, what to question. You get to see excerpts from new books. You get all kinds of stuff. Once we start working on the Dear Writer, You Are Not Alone book, which we have officially begun now that the You're Doing It Right book is out and officially finished, the paperbacks are ready. We are going to also start releasing some things there on that book. So please do check that out. Thank you again for being here. We're so glad to have you on the Quick Cast, and we will see you next time. Bye.